Thank you so much for this introduction, and thank you all for being here. It's my immense pleasure that we can now have this conversation here with Jota. It's part of a series we've always done at DLD, which is to basically at every DLD introduce in an interview an artist whose practice has really been incredible and inspiring. That's, for example, how we introduced a few years ago Walter Price here. That's also how we introduced Precious Okoyomon to DLD. And this year we're going to talk about Jota's extraordinary performance at the Venice Biennale. A very, very warm welcome to Jota Mombaça. And I thought to begin with the beginning, it could maybe be actually fascinating to begin with a quote, which is in Portuguese, because we did a long conversation for a book I did of Brazilian conversations. That's how we got to know each other. And there wasn't really a translator, so I had to do it in Brazilian. And my Portuguese is really not very good. So, but I had to just somehow try to understand, and I learned more. So I'm going to read you this quote now. Super crítica, yeah, because Glisson says we always need at least 2 languages on every panel. So let's have your quote here. Super crítica das novas formas de extractivismo que são viabilizadas pelo mundo da arte por esse mercado neoliberal que tenta lucrar com a diferença, explorando precisamente a transparência e traduzibilidade dessas diferenças. Acredito que o direito à opacidade é uma reivindicação que se opõe a esses modos de extração porque traz à tona a potência do segredo. Now, it's important that we have here your critique of any form of extractivism, which is really so essential in your practice. We have also the revendication, in a way, of the Glissantian right to opacity. Can you explain this quote to us?
Yeah. Maybe I should translate, but I mean, I'll do it like erratically. But it's a quote in which I kind of reflect on how extractivism kind of it's reshaped in contemporary art systems and in many systems. So if we have like an image of extractivism that is still very present with the extraction of the land and of the land as resource. But there's also levels of extractivism that depend on, let's say, not quite material forms of extraction, which I mean, extraction of information, data, and all these topics, but of course, also the extraction of difference and the production of difference as a value that only can be framed as such when it's transparent, when it's something that we can understand, or when it's something that we can consume somehow. So what I'm critic of is like, precisely this idea that a difference needs to be understandable in order for it to be relatable. And that's why I mentioned to Edouard Glissant, the Caribbean poet and thinker, who elaborates this idea of opacity and the right to opacity, which is the right of being unknown even to yourself, and the right of like existing as a difference that it's not immediately inscribed by transparency, existing as a difference that can remain incomprehensible. So I'm quite interested in these things because I'm interested in the secret. I'm interested in the mystery. And the secret not as that thing that we don't tell each other, but the thing that we tell each other in an opaque language, in a language that cannot be read clearly, but you can still relate to it. You can still communicate with it, because it's possible to communicate in opacity. It's possible to communicate without transparency and without resourcing to this idea of like explaining a difference and making it understandable. So what if we could relate to each other without completely understanding each other? But of course, there are so many ways to reach that possibility is not viable. And of course, when you think about coloniality and the history of the world as we know it, we'll think about this attempt to make that difference that's not known as much known as possible, which is this attempt to translate, to expose, to extract. And that's what I'm critic of, and that's what this quote is about.
And it's actually really true for all of your works. This is why it's, I think, good to put it at the beginning. And this critique of extractivism is also mirrored in the writing of Alexis Pauline Gams, who said that we have the opportunity now as a species, fully in touch with each other, to unlearn and also to relearn our own patterns of thinking and storytelling in a way that allows us actually to be in communion with our environment, as opposed to a dominating colonialist separation from the environment. That was, of course, very much also the case for this piece in Venice. This truly extraordinary performance, it happened actually on an island, San Giacomo of the Rebaudengo Foundation. It almost gave a new life to this island because they are now starting to program art there. And it was a very important place in the 70s because actually during the Theater Biennale in 1975, the Polish avant-garde director Jerzy Grotowski staged Apocalypsis cum Figuris there. And it was an incredible performance where in the darkness, broken only by the candlelight, the apocalypse seemed like a dream. So, yeah, almost 40 years later, you arrive on the island and actually did this piece, which is also the title of today's talk, In the Tired Watering. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this piece? One of the most powerful pieces I've ever seen in relation to climate change also, and maybe also how it connects to the sort of radical experimentalism of Grotowski, and how also you choreographed it in a way that actually became more and more, I would say, for the visitor. The visitor was actually asked to leave because the water is coming, so it became real. It kind of connects to the topic also of DLD of this year.
Yeah. So this piece is part of like an ongoing project because I've been interested in the way elements sense, or the way elements think, the way the elements speak, write, draw. So I've been really interested to know how the earth thinks or how the earth expresses. But in this case specifically, I was actually activating this project that is focused on a research on water, on a way of thinking on how water expresses, how water thinks, and what water has to say about global warming, or what water has to say about the planetary condition we are all facing right now. And of course, doing it in Venice, which is such a key context for the contemporary art world, but also a key context to think about the rising of water displacement, I mean, with all the aqua alta, as a constant experience there, that literally the whole city is kind of covered by water. So for this project, I tried to attune to it, I tried to sense it, and to communicate with water, because I'm quite interested in thinking, and I need to rephrase that. It's not that I am quite interested in thinking about how water thinks, but I'm quite interested in channeling a form of sense in water, which I mean giving space to water express, giving space to the elements express, because I'm quite interested in that. I'm interested in the possibility of like the human species living the central spot of existence in this planet, and ceding space to a more dynamic and non-linear form of existence that encompasses also the way the elements think, the way the elements act. Because for sure, water is saying something about our planetary condition. Water is expressing something. And of course, that watery expression can be read as through science, as information that might help us to take like key decisions in the way we as a society live. But I also think that water has a particular form of like addressing the problem that sometimes even our most brilliant minds cannot reach. So how can we actually give space to water express? And for me, art and poetry are forms of like opening up that space. So that's part of the process there. The process there is also related with exhaustion, which is the exhaustion of existing in a flooding planet. Of course, to certain localities, it might not seem as such an urgent problem if we live in a continent or in a nation that is protected by certain aspects, although at this point, everyone is suffering that to a certain extent. But water is definitely coming, and water is coming, and it's displacing people. It's literally doing it. It's like literally crashing places, crashing communities, crashing cities. So the performance there was also an attempt to confront the art audience and us all with this very fact that it's happening now, because I always think that what's happening elsewhere is also happening here. So a war is also happening, is always happening everywhere. Water displacement is always happening everywhere. Even if in my town it's not quite there, and if I'm not sensing there in my town because my town is somehow protected, let's imagine, it's still happening there because it's happening somewhere in the globe. And within the system that we are now living in, everything relates, everything is somehow entangled. So that kind of like social reading of the flooding word, along with a desire to let water speak and water express, kind of form the core of this project. And I think it kind of relates with the topic of this event, of course, when we think about the question. So reality rules. So reality is precisely tends to be an hegemonic form of understanding what is possible. And within a certain hegemonic framework, water expression is not possible because the elements are not read as conscious somehow. So the fact that we were trying at that point to make a conversation in which water speaks, water expresses, was already a form of like challenging reality, challenging an idea of reality that depends of like representing what is possible and what is impossible in two very separate kind of like ways. So I think that's the way that conversation kind of like encounters the topic of this conference, because it somehow it departs from a speculative gesture. What if water was telling us something about the way the planet is flooding? So that's
the connection to reality rules. And as you say, water is coming. It was also very much actually the address to the visitor, because we were told again and again by your performers to leave. And we initially didn't understand why. And it created a very big confusion. And then more and more, the performer said, because the water is coming. And at the end, literally, the space was devastated in that sense by the coming flood. But there is a strong sonic dimension to the work. It's basically a score you wrote, a sonic composition. And that kind of connects also to what you did at the Serpentine the year before.
Yes.
Actually 2 years ago, when you took over the Serpentine Pavilion and created this very participatory kind of polyphonic installation. I think it would be great to hear a little bit more about the sort of sonic score you wrote for Venice, and then maybe also how you worked with sound in the Serpentine, because with sound in the Serpentine, it was actually different because it was the sound of all the participants.
Yeah. So I think it gets back to that conversation about Glissant's thinking and like how to escape the necessity of understanding to relate. How can we relate without understanding? And then on that matter, I've been thinking about voice not only as a channel of discourse, but also as sound. And sound as something that we can relate to in a sensitive way. It's something that affects and it generates sensation. So if we think about images, we can look at an image and we can feel something. But we just feel something because we are somehow interpreting that. We are relating to that in a way that's representational. I look at an image, I think about something that the image somehow expresses. Sound does something completely different. I can even find representations in sound, like words. A word is a representation that comes through sound. But sound also has another quality, because sound touches. So if I had like a subwoofer right now and a bass track, I could play it. And I could play it in a frequency that some of us, most of us, wouldn't still be able to hear. Although most of us would be able to feel it kind of vibrating in our body. So sound is haptic. Sound touches. And that's why I'm interested in sound as a matter of a way of expressing. Because I think we are like somehow, we have so many images at this point. And we are so buried in them. And there's this constant demand for interpretation, but we are not able to interpret anything because there are so many things coming and all the time, in such a high intensity, that I'm really interested in a way of like escaping the centrality of visual culture into a sensorial form of culture. So in a sensorial culture, we can listen and the sounds will touch us, and that touch will make something with us, which is emotion, which is sensibility, which sometimes it's not rational. But there's power in escaping rationalities also. There's power in moving beyond that particular frame in order to allow ourselves to feel otherwise, to sense otherwise. And I think it could definitely help us to hear what water is saying, or what the land is saying, or what the wind is saying. I mean, indigenous people all over the planet have been doing it for quite a long time. And that's definitely a particular form of knowing that I consider very important, and that I consider that most of our visual culture and our current culture kind of overlooks that. And that's why I'm interested in sound, because sound touches.
Now the wind leads us also to a very beautiful piece you did for our book, the 140 Artists' Idea for Planet Earth, which we edited actually almost like a DIY manual in terms of, what can we do? Kind of connects very much to the previous panel, what can we do urgently in relation to the environment? And I was kind of wondering, because it connects so beautifully to the wind, if maybe you could read your piece, because it's something we want to invite you all to do when you come home after DLD.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Breathe. Now turn off your phone and open all the doors and windows of your home. Whisper a secret to the wind. That's it. It's quite simple.
Now a last question. I know we're out of time, but Emily Siegel is here, and I do have to ask that last question, because Emily, as a futurist, has just told us that actually the future of blockchain has to do with poetry. Now, poetry does play a very important role in your practice, and it connects also beautifully to, if you want to go back to the previous DLD talk with Precious Okoyomon, which we did 3 years ago. You can see it online on the DLD archive. And that talk was also about a practice of a visual artist who is also a poet, and that's very much the case of you. And we, of course, work together with Lem Sisse on this project, actually, in Manchester, which was about artists who write poetry and poets who do visual art. So I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about that, and about your work with poetry, and also with writing in general, because you've actually written a book which, again, because of it's not been translated to English, I've not been able to fully yet read. I only understood about 30%, and I wait for the English translation. But it's a book which has a huge impact in Brazil on all my friends. So it would be great to hear about your poetry and about your new book, which Kobogo published.
That's great. I'll try to be quick because of the time thing. I think I'm also interested in poetry because I feel that as far as writing or written words go, poetry is one of the few strategies we have to kind of touch the unspeakable, touch the unpredictable within language. So I'm quite interested in that. Also, in respect to my particular personal history, there's so many things that were left unsaid by my ancestors that I'm really interested in a way of like connecting with it. And for me, poetry kind of allows that. And it also allows for connecting with that which is not imaginable yet. Because poetry is a language at the threshold of language. We are always like experimenting ways of like reach that moment of unspeakability with words, and we are most times failing in doing it. But the exercise, the attempt of like touch the unspeakable, touch what was not said, touch what's yet to be said, which needs to be said, but it still don't have enough means to. So that's why I'm interested in poetry. I mean, the conversation about the book will be for another moment when it's like translated in English, because we also have the time.
Jota, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.